Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We're just going to give everyone a couple of minutes. For those people at back-to-back meetings, just give them a minute to get into our webinar. While we wait, it would be helpful to know if anyone's ever experienced Action Learning in the chat, just to share with us what your experience is, or have you been in an Action Learning set? Or where you're coming from, or where you're joining us from, should I say? South Wales Island, wow. Got a good range of distances already. Sheffield, Leeds. Cool. And there's quite a mix of experience as well, which is really nice to see. Love it. Cool. Okay, so let's get started then. So thank you for joining us today. And we're thrilled to dive into the topic around Action Learning, but also for me, a focus on how organisations are using it ultimately to develop better leaders, better conversations, and sort of that problem-solving capability within organisations. If you think of any questions as we go through, feel free to share and add them either to the Q&A, and we'll try and either keep up with them at the end, but we do have time at the end to do some questions and answers. So please do join us for that, and we can have a discussion around what specific questions you've got. We'll also send a follow-up link with the email of the recording of the webinar if you want to go back on anything. But also there's a couple of opportunities to register either for one of our experience sessions or our up and coming participant training, which is a new program we're creating to support everybody who actually wants to understand a little bit more, but actually maybe they're joining a Action Learning set and don't know what to expect and things like that. So we're hoping that training really helps people. Before we actually get into the session, I think it'd be useful to introduce ourselves, but my name's Charlotte Snowden. I'm the Managing Director at Action Learning Associates. So my background, I've spent over 20 odd years working in leadership development, learning, leadership in myself, but also from a range of organisational development and a range of sectors. So my key is I'm really passionate about helping organisations sort of really develop the leaders' capability through inquiry, reflection, and real workplace learning, whether that's alongside programs that we're delivering, whether that's actually individual Action Learning sort of orientation sets, or just developing that skill set. And that's, you know, for me, it's critical as we go through sort of some of the ambiguity that leaders operate and find ourselves in day to day. I'm joined by my colleague Daisy, who will be taking us through part of the webinar, but also supporting the Q&A. So keep your questions coming through. But Daisy, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Daisy. I'm director alongside Charlotte at ALA. My background's a bit different to Charlotte. I started out in NHS mental health services and then went from there on to housing, social housing and homelessness services, mostly in operations, and then moved from there into people development, training and development. So I'm interested in how to help people be good at their jobs, and also how to help people be sane in their jobs and have some look after themselves so that they can do their work sustainably, particularly thinking about challenging frontline operational environments or pressured charity sector environments or public sector environments where budgets are tight, trying to help people find and build a space to look after their space for thinking and I suppose self-care as well. Yeah, that's my background.
So we've got a range of backgrounds for you to question and see if you've got any questions around Action Learning or how it can help you in your role or organisation. So please use that opportunity while we're here.
Yeah.
So by the end of today, we hope that you'll have a clear understanding of what Action Learning is if you don't already know, but why it works and where it could add value in organisations or for you. And if it resonates with you, we'll finish by sharing different pathways that are available in terms of whether that's you're interested in becoming a participant, or you're becoming a participant and want to go on that, or you want to become a facilitator of this, or you're in an organisation developing leaders or looking to build organisational capability. How can you do that? But also sort of give you an idea around what that looks like. And I want to sort of take you, I guess the key bit for me is when I think about this is every organisation has complex challenges that don't disappear despite effort. And I think that's what we keep seeing on a regular basis. But when you think about when you work in organisations or you're part of an organisation, what is the challenge that has persisted despite, having trained people? You've been in meetings about it, you brought in potentially consultants, or you've written action plans, but actually, yet the challenge still exists. And if you could think about if there's anything particular, do share it in the chat. Quite often I'll hear conversations with potential clients about that their leaders aren't, creating the space for people to think, they're just telling them what to do, as an example. And we get that quite often because obviously they're not being trained in terms of, how to actually leave that space open for people to find their own solutions. They're so used to just giving them. And if you've got any examples, do share it in the chat in terms of what's the challenge you've seen that it keeps prevailing ultimately when you've tried some of this. Would love to know. And the reality I see in many organisations is they do significantly invest in developing their people. And we're not saying that, ultimately all of these are valuable interventions, whether that's leadership programs, coaching, mentoring. They're all valuable and they all have their place. And a lot of organisations do invest heavily and a lot of money in it. But quite often what we find is it's not always giving them the results they want. They're still facing the same challenges. So we still experience as leaders ultimately trying to solve every problem. They continue to carry a lot of responsibility. Teams still look upwards for answers. So it's quite hierarchical and they like to be given the action or they're told what to do. Or they might like it, they might not like it. Collaboration across functions can be difficult, so we can see a lot of silo work, and these problems keep resurfacing. And for me, perhaps the most important element is people rarely have time or space to stop and actually think and then work through the complex challenges together. Many of the leadership challenges today we see aren't caused by lack of knowledge either. They are caused by the complexity, the ambiguity, and they all have a certain skill set that leaders need. And for me, that's around their involvement in how they become better, taking better judgment calls, how they deal with competing priorities, the different relationships that they've got to consider, and ultimately the uncertainty in environments that quite often we find. And probably the fast pace of everything nowadays really does contribute sort of to that element. So the question for me then becomes, if we're already investing in developing our people in these different ways, why do the challenges still exist? And why do we still continue to see some of the challenges? So for me, again, this comes very much down to the current operating environment and the way it's changed significantly over the years. And for me, we're going into a new era as well, which makes it even faster. Knowledge is so readily available. So actually, what difference do we make and how do we help? And if you think, the decisions leaders have to make now are ultimately, they don't have all the information. They're balancing loads of different competing priorities and responding to challenges that actually don't have simple or obvious answers. And at the same time, expectations of leaders have evolved. So it's no longer enough to be the person with all the answers, with all the knowledge. Increasingly, we're seeing that shift to organisations need leaders who develop thinking of others, build capability within their teams, but also create the right environment where people take ownership and solve problems together. And I think what's really important to me at the moment is the world of AI and how does that, how does the action learning support and enable and embed in some ways AI? Because it's not about, if you want the knowledge, AI is there to support, it can give you all sorts, but actually human judgment, human decision making, human leadership, that they're skill sets that are really prevalent and will continue in my world. So it's less about having the right answers for yourself and more about asking the right questions and creating space for reflection that enable better thinking across teams, individuals, and organisations. So if the world of leadership has changed, perhaps then we need to look at how we develop leaders to evolve that as well. I mentioned before that the challenge isn't always about knowledge, and often we find people have the resources within them already. It's just actually giving people the opportunity to think differently about what they already know. Most people and individuals already know the principles of good, what good looks like in their role and their jobs. They know they should delegate more if they're a leader. They need to listen more. Looking at how they collaborate and empower teams. But the issue isn't the lack of knowledge, they know how to do that. It's actually applying that knowledge when they're dealing with competing priorities, difficult conversations and complex situations. What we often find is people don't need another model, they don't need another framework, they just need that opportunity to reflect and challenge their own assumptions, to hear different perspectives and work through their challenges in a structured way. And today, that's what Action Learning provides. We're going to go through and introduce you to the approach and what it looks like, but also how it's been helping organisations tackle these kinds of challenges for over 70 years. And it has been around that long, but I also still believe that actually as we move forward in an era of AI and automation and a faster pace where everything's just there at your fingertips, that this has a place to play in terms of taking that time out and helping leaders and individuals really think about what's right for them and how do they take it forward, moving that way. So let me bring it to life with an example. So we've worked with a leader who recently stepped into a head of service role, were part of the Action Learning. They inherited an underperforming team, and naturally they wanted to improve performance as quickly as possible. So they did what many good leaders do initially. They stepped in, they solved the problems, they took the work, they answered questions, they made decisions and tried to support everybody. But despite all that effort, nothing really changed. All the decisions kept going back to them. The team kept increasingly dependent on them, and they found themselves ultimately becoming a bottleneck. And we find that quite common, especially when people step up into leadership and they haven't really understood what the role is and how to let go. But through Action Learning and through part of being in an Action Learning set, something really shifted for this person. Rather than being given advice or another leadership model, they had the opportunity to reflect on their own thinking, their own approach. And through the questions of the group, they began to see patterns that they had not noticed before in terms of how they are delegating, how they're behaving as a leader. And they realized the problem wasn't their capability, it was actually their approach. So they started asking more questions around how they could challenge some of that, how could they change. They created more ownership within the team by asking questions within their team. But ultimately, they really did become more comfortable with stepping back rather than stepping in. So again, instead of rescuing. And over time, their team became more confident. So the reason I share this is ultimately Action Learning isn't about giving people the answers. It's about helping them discover the right answers for their own situations. Sorry, I was just having a coffee fit there, but I'll hand over to Daisy to go through a little bit about what Action Learning is.
Good timing. Good timing for a coughing fit there. Okay, so I see from the chat some of you know what Action Learning is already. That's brilliant. Tell me what I miss here. I'll do a little bit of an introduction to what Action Learning is and what people kind of get from it. For those of you who have tried facilitating Action Learning or being part of an Action Learning set before, please chip in with what else you've seen and what else you notice about the process or the benefits of the process. I'll start with what Action Learning isn't, I suppose. So as Charlotte said, this is quite different from traditional training. You're not where traditional training might bring in theoretical information and then try to embed that with case studies or role play or hypothetical discussions. Action Learning kind of skips past all of that and goes straight to what are the challenges and situations people in the room are facing in their roles, and what can we learn from those, and what real action can we take. Okay, so it builds on Reg Revans, who created Action Learning's kind of core understanding of where real learning comes from, that it's not about theory, actually. It's about, well, a little sprinkling of theory, perhaps, but really it comes from combining experience with time to reflect on that experience, learning through solving real problems. So that's what Action Learning tries to harness the power of the potential there. How does it work in practice? The first thing you need to do Action Learning is a group of people. So we call a group of people doing Action Learning an Action Learning set. That's the group. Normally it's a small group, 5 to 8 people. Usually they're peers roughly, so not kind of massive disparities of seniority, although they don't have to be in the same job. They might be people in similar roles, or they might be from different roles across departments or even across organizations. So you've got a rich mix of perspectives in the group. And once you've got that group together, you'd agree with them how many times that the same group are going to meet. Often a group will contract to meet, let's say, 6 times over the course of 8 months or a year, or 6 months to a year. So there's a regular meeting where trust and skills can build over the course of time. In each session, what will happen is one person at a time will present a challenge that they're facing. So they'll talk about a real situation in their work, maybe a challenge, maybe an opportunity, usually something complex with no immediate solution. And the idea is that the group will give them some space to explore something that really matters to them, to help them find some fresh thinking. So once they've told the group what that challenge is, what that situation is, there's some time for the kind of magic of Action Learning, which is reflective questioning. So instead of me saying, here's my challenge I'm facing, and you all piling in and saying, this is what you need to do, you'll stop, you'll listen to me, and you'll help me see what I'm not seeing. Okay, so you'll use open questions to help me gain a deeper understanding of the problem. What are the root causes? What assumptions am I making? What perspectives might I be missing? What options might I have not considered? What new angles might I be able to see this from? Okay, so it's that precious, magical, rare space to actually stop and think, rather than just do, which is the focus of so much of our lives, isn't it, in and out of work. So you create this magical space to think, to stop, to reflect. And from there, the person presenting the challenge can build an action plan. This is what I'm going to do with it, and the group can support them with that to refine the action plan, to make it tighter, more precise, more realistic for the challenge that's been presented. Okay, once they've got their kind of basic plan, their action plan, the group will then help them generate more ideas, more insights, reflections on what they've all heard while they were listening to that person. So this is where you get to, as a presenter, you get to increase your self-awareness, because people will reflect back to you. What did they notice while listening to you tackle your workplace challenge? What perspective might they feel you've not seen yet? What ideas might they be able to share? What insights might they be able to offer? So this collaborative process, you get this kind of lovely, juicy collection of different perspectives and approaches put together that the presenter can then take away with them, taking them beyond what they might have been able to do on their own, or just with a one-to-one coaching situation. Then the final kind of step in each session is something about accountability. So when the action plan is solidified for that presenter, they're gonna go away, take action out in the real world, and then bring it back at the next meeting next time to tell the group how they got on, what the pitfalls were, what the challenges were, so that they can get some further support to, if they need to, develop the action plan, present it again, and be held to account for what they commit to doing, so that progress is sustained and meaningful going forwards. So that's the sort of rough outline. So what you have here is a sort of a container, a structure through which you can delve quite flexibly into whatever are the most potent challenges in each person's role at a particular time. Okay, so if that feels different to what some of you understand as Action Learning, please do add it in the chat. But that's the sort of roughly what we try to offer. Okay, and the idea is what people are taking away is solutions and ideas about a particular topic, but also skills, right? So they're also learning how to listen, how to ask good questions, how to reflect on a challenge, and how to and increased self-awareness as well. So there's a sort of specific takeaways and the sort of generalized takeaways of skill development. Okay. Can I have the next slide, please, Charlotte? I want to just pause briefly and think about the role of the group, because some of you will have had experience of one-to-one coaching or, you know, a really helpful one-to-one meeting with a manager. And this is really quite different because of the kind of the power of the group. I've got a background in neuroscience, and this really kind of sits well with how neurobiology works, that we work with kind of complex networks of connections. That's how our brains change and think, rather than in a linear one-to-one way. And action learning sort of reflects that, because you've got all these different perspectives in the room, and what the people are there with you are trying to do is not to give advice, rush in and rescue, as Charlotte says, as some of the participants might be used to doing for their teams, but rather to help each other think, to sit with each other and train each other to think, to see assumptions, to see blind spots, generate new options, gain more clarity, make decisions, and then commit to an action plan that the individual owns for themselves and they can feel empowered to take away. So that's the sort of the value of the group in action learning. Good questions and also reflections. People talk a lot about diversity at work, don't they? The value of diversity, and this is where you see it really come to life, when you've got people from different cultures, ages, roles, ways of thinking. You know, different. You know, talk about different ways, different brains, right? That they're going to bring surprising questions, surprising reflections that help shift a fixed mindset that we might individually have on our own. Okay, the next slide, please, Charlotte. So briefly, I want to think about the role of having the importance of having a trained facilitator for action learning. So Reg Revens, who I've mentioned, who created action learning back in the 40s, was keen that it be something that's accessible for people and not complicated and not exclusive. So it is inclusive and available to people. But we do often see, when we speak to people who have encountered action learning before, that there are real risks when action learning is undertaken without someone who knows who's been trained to facilitate it properly. And the risks are that with a group of people who've put this precious time aside to reflect, they start off kind of holding to the reflective space often quite well, but over time what happens is often that protected space I told you about for open questions and listening gets sort of diluted as people chip in with little bits of advice and little bits of suggestions, and gradually it tends to become more of a chat, less structured, or even if the process is held to, it gets a bit too cozy and a bit too comfortable, rather than the group being held at a sort of challenging edge where the challenge is high alongside the support, and people are really being pushed to do powerful thinking. So that's the sort of the risk we want to avoid. And what happens when people are starting to find the sessions less helpful is that they stop attending, and when they stop attending, you can't do the group work in the same way, and the whole thing sort of dribbles out. And the worst thing, from me and Charlotte's perspective, is that it gives action learning a bad name, because people have been in these groups and they've said, oh yeah, I've tried action learning, and basically it was rubbish, because what they've been doing is chatting. So what you can get with a trained facilitator, someone who knows what they're doing, is all these things in the bullets there. So someone who can create a structured space, role model the process, teach people how to use it and how to resist that temptation to jump in and rescue. They can help set up a space that feels psychologically safe by building trust between the group members and picking up challenges as they come in. They can support and value those diverse perspectives and help kind of support the group as needed, so that everyone is heard, handle group dynamics as they go along, really kind of protect the space fiercely, really as fiercely as is needed, and then support accountable action. So again, it doesn't become too sweet and soft and cozy, or too kind of challenging and harsh. It's that balance all the time that the facilitator can help hold. So that doesn't mean that we're saying it has to be us facilitating your action learning sessions. On the contrary, we love training facilitators and sending them out into the world. But it does help to have someone who can really protect that space on behalf of the group. Good. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So to recap, I suppose, what we've said so far, what's different? What makes action learning different from traditional learning opportunities? This kind of standard learning, training session that you might come and bring into your company, which lots of us will have experienced and lots of us will have valued, is on the left. So an expert comes in to teach us some crucial answers, gives us some important bits of information. You start with learning, and then maybe you use case studies or hypothetical situations to embed that learning, to take the theory into practice. Okay, this can be very helpful. The trainer is there to give us advice, share their experience and share their knowledge. Yeah, so this all has its place, and it is of value. Action learning is quite different though. When participants come into the room to do action learning, they're going to be discovering answers for themselves through the working through of real challenges. So the challenge or the topic or the opportunity in their role comes first. That's center stage. What is happening in my life and my job right now? And it's through that the learning is teased out rather than through a kind of abstract theory. The learning comes through the practice itself, both the skills that you're developing of asking great questions, of listening, of reflecting, of increasing your self-awareness, and through that sharing of best practice as you listen to each other present different challenges. You know, when you hear someone say, gosh, you know, I'm really struggling with my relationship with my manager, or you say, I'm really struggling with this person that I work with, or this workload that feels totally overwhelming, you also can learn for your own role. So you're learning not just from your presentation, but from what other people are presenting. So rather than learning through being given advice, you're learning through inquiry. How, not what am I thinking and what do I know, but how do I think and how can I learn? Okay. Yeah, maybe that's a good way of summarizing that. It's something about what to think rather than how to think. Sorry, the other way around, how to think rather than what to think. Okay. We did a nice piece of research recently, which was we wanted to kind of figure out whether what we're doing is having the right impact. So we reconnected with people who have done action learning through us over many years, some a long time ago, some more recently. And we asked them, rather than kind of what stayed with you, or what do you think of the program you did with us, or the action learning you did with us, we asked them what stayed with you looking in the rearview mirror kind of over time. Some quotes here from what people have said. So something about action learning united our professional team around shared objectives and ideas. So there's something about the way that people are working together across a team. The next person talked about how they felt in their role as director. So something about skill set and what they were able to do and how they felt about what they were able to do. And then someone gave this quite global comment. Action learning has become fundamental to how I think about things. I mean, the themes that came across to us most consistently was that people weren't remembering a particular model or a technique. They were talking about changes in how they think, how they work, how they lead. People talked about becoming more reflective, listening more deeply, asking better questions. And kind of my favorite thing I heard people say from this is that they realized that the people around them were more resourceful than they first realized. So by being asked to question yourself and finding your own solution to a problem, it makes you feel more resourceful yourself. And it makes you realize that the other people in the group around you and the other people that you work with beyond the action learning set are also more resourceful than you had realized. So this impulse to rescue, this need to be the bottleneck, sort of simmers down as people flex this muscle. People talked about more collaboration and changes to the way that they were working long after the programs had finished. Good. Okay. So to summarize kind of what I wanted to talk about, something about what's the impact of action learning, and I value anyone to chip in of anything I've missed here recently, really. What's the value of action learning? It's quite hard to pin down because, of course, every group, every individual who comes to action learning is going to talk about something different. And you can agree as a group, as a set, before beginning action learning, what the focus is going to be. It might be quite specific to, for example, you know, I'm doing a lot of work at the moment with a big NHS mental health trust. How are newly qualified nurses tackling their roles? And that's the focus. It could be really broad. The set I'm part of in my own life is, you know, completely open. We can bring anything from a personal, professional life. Other people we work with are very, very focused. It's all about, you know, how to increase sales in a particular business. So the takeaways in terms of best practice, in terms of new ideas, can vary according to the topic agreed. But there are some sort of general takeaways that we find happen across different sets and different contexts. There's something about psychological safety. So an organization, you might have heard people talk about a growth mindset. And an organization that has a lot of action learning in play in the organization, people feel less afraid to take risks, to make mistakes, to learn from mistakes, because they're used to offering ideas, thinking about them, raising concerns, having honest conversations, and being more three-dimensional and real about what they're not sure about in their role, and learning from that rather than being criticized for it. Something about complex problems. So if you've, of course, got a space to tackle those questions that don't have a clear answer, don't have a right or wrong, that's really valuable, and it can help people create that space in their work. We talked about collaboration already, breaking down silos. If you've got people from the marketing team in with the operations team, then of course they're going to understand each other better. They're going to know each other as humans, and they're going to understand each other's challenges and perspectives better. And that's going to kind of carry out beyond the action learning set and the action learning session. Better leaders, we talked about this already, a leader who can ask questions rather than solve problem solving, who can listen, who can see real potential in their team, is going to be a completely different person to experience as a leader or a manager than someone who's trying to do it all for them. And then this culture of accountability and ownership. This is a lovely thing, to go into a company or an organization where people are used to kind of being cross with what the leaders are doing, grumbling about, this, that, or other isn't working for me in my role, or this is what I don't like about the leadership. Rather, an action learning set will say, okay, this is the challenge. What can I control? What can't I control? What am I going to do about it? And then they go off and take the action. So it really shifts people out of that perspective of arms crossed, us and them in an organization as well. So these are some of the themes we see. I don't know if I've missed anything. If anyone wants to add anything in the chat. All that said, it's not going to be the right solution for every situation. I think, Charlotte, are you going to pick up here to talk about this bit?
Yeah, I can do.
Okay.
So one of the things we're also passionate about is actually it needs to be the right approach. And action learning is powerful and it has a really good impact, but it isn't the answer to everything. So, for example, if people need technical knowledge or they need to learn new skills, then training is actually the better solution. There's little value asking people to reflect on something that actually requires a little bit of input or instruction in order for them to get started. Equally, if a decision's already been made, action learning is not going to help you find the right approach or the right decision or challenge your perspective on it. So it's really designed to ultimately explore genuine challenges, topics, ideas, whatever it might be that you bring in. But ultimately, it's not where, it's a predetermined outcome. It's something where you can actually have a little bit of reflection time, consider different perspectives, different possibilities, and ultimately go from that perspective. It does rely on people wanting to be open and willing to reflect and be curious around their current predicament even. And if individuals aren't prepared to explore their own thinking or consider different perspectives, then the process won't achieve its full potential. So part of it for me is when we're working with organisations is how do we set up people coming into the sets for success, and how do we work with the stakeholders in the business to really understand, is this the right solution, and are they prepared to invest in it in a different way? Because it works best when there's a real challenge to explore, when people are committed and the group really sort of opens to help each other, but also to challenge each other through questions. And they want to explore. So before we recommend action learning, we always ask ourselves and work with the people involved to make sure and question, is this actually the right intervention for the challenge that you're trying to solve? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes it's no. So we might look at other alternatives or help them find the right alternative. So when is action learning the right solution? If they're the situations that it isn't and it doesn't fit, where can it make a difference? So there's 3 examples I'll share, and then there's other ones. If you would like to know, then we can share them. There's some case studies on our website you can have a look at. But the 3 main ones at the moment is the first one is Aquarius. So that's a charity supporting people in the Midlands area, and they wanted to build internal capability by developing some leaders who could actually facilitate action learning themselves and create a reflective, solution-focused conversations and space on a more regular basis. They were finding that they were working in silos, so they wanted to create the ability for leaders to come together to challenge some of that. We delivered our facilitator training and have continued to support them over a number of years, but we've also embedded the approach into their leadership and development activities. And it has become a regular routine in terms of how they operate. And they've really invested in it. And they're also investing in another cohort. But ultimately, I think the key indicator for me is that the way they're creating value, they're building a sustainable internal capability rather than rely on external support. And they're investing in that. And for Aquarius, action learning wasn't a one-off intervention. It's then started to become a part of how they develop their people, especially new starters and new leaders as they get promoted. With A2 Dominion even. So it's one of the UK's largest housing associations. They wanted to strengthen the capability of managers across the organisation. And like many organisations we work with or speak to, they recognise that technical expertise wasn't enough and it wasn't on its own. So managers needed greater confidence, better decision making, better conversations, so they could really sort of build their judgment and their skills around making a way forward and taking action. Action learning was embedded within their management development program, so this underpinned some of the training, which is a great way of using it as well. But what it does in doing it that way, it gives managers the opportunity to work on real issues and challenges between the learning sessions, so their training, rather than simply just returning to the business as usual and hoping that they embed it. And what we see is actually you'll find that instead of just learning leadership theory, by applying it immediately and put it into sort of the action learning or coming back to an action learning set and seeing how things have been applied, it really helps develop confidence in application. They learn more from each other and share some success stories, but also help each other with difficult relationships, with applying that learning in the organisation. But it makes it much more sustainable as well. So it really does help to land and bridge the gap between learning and doing. With Sandvik, it's a global engineering business. They were looking for a leadership program and they had a commercial challenge. But the key part they wanted to look at was how do they get their business development managers who worked in isolation to actually work more collaboratively and more effectively when delivering strategic projects. So instead of going off and doing their own thing, they work to a greater good and one approach for the whole of them rather than individually doing their own projects to see how it pans out. And through that process, each participant worked on a real business project through the action learn set. And between sessions, they then went away and applied the actions that they discovered during the set itself and reported back each time they would meet as a group on what they'd achieved and supported each other in sort of taking the next steps. And the impact of that one went well beyond just individual learning. Sort of, it really did help the organisation with the collaboration across that group, with the effectiveness of some of the processes and some of the ways of working. And it really sort of helped them be better connected as business and quite influential business leaders across that piece. So action learning wasn't separate from the work, it was actually became part of the work in terms of that project approach as well. So all these organisations operate in very different sectors and face very different challenges, but they recognise the same thing. Some of their biggest challenges couldn't be solved by just giving more information or more training. They needed a way to really develop that thinking space and work on the real work, but also help them develop their network and ultimately work with other people. And these are just 3 examples I plucked out to share with you, but we've seen action learning used across different variations. So we've seen it worked with inductions, we've seen it work with international nurses trying to transition them into the UK way of working. Organisational change, cross-functional collaboration. We've seen it with succession and talent planning. I've had quite a few conversations around how do we use it as part of our talent and succession in order to, develop the skills that it takes to step up into the next role. We've used it around career transitions as well. So people that would love to be in management roles, how you get support around that. But the common thing is always sort of the same. So it doesn't matter what sector or what the challenge is, it's actually that the organisation are using action learning where there isn't a simple answer or where developing people anymore isn't the right solution. It's actually how do you create the space for thinking and helping them to build them problem solving skills. So as you think about your own organisation or the work you do, where do you think actually action learning could have a greatest impact and could it add more value? For some of you, it might be around developing new managers. Others, it might be helping senior leaders think more strategically. For some of you, it might be how do I learn it so I can then take it into organisations if you work as a freelancer. But that's why we don't see Action Learn as a standalone intervention. We see it as a flexible approach that can be applied to really help people think better together, ultimately. So to sum that one up, different organisations, different challenges, but the same outcome. How do you develop people to solve real organisational issues or issues that they're facing or topics? Equally, it could be how do they generate a new idea and how do they share that? So if you're wondering where to begin, we have created a number of different ways for you to get started, which I'll share with you. And if today's webinar has resonated with you, then you don't need to make a massive commitment to get started. You can just start to explore. So Action Learning isn't a single product or program for us. It's an approach that really supports individuals at different stages for different purposes. So rather than asking which course should you attend, I'd encourage you to think about what pathway is best for you and what describes where you're coming from today. So if you're a participant or would like to be a participant, you could start by registering for our Experience Our Action Learning. So we'll share the link. We've allocated 2 taster sessions for people on here, so you can sign up to attend one and actually, you can experience Action Learning. We will follow that up in the email as well. You can develop your participant skills. So we're shortly launching a participant training program, which is free. You just have to sign up to get the access to it. And that is ultimately for anyone who start going on to Action Learning, it's just to get what to expect, what are the key skills I will develop, or what do I need to set myself up for success going into that. And you can also join one of our open Action Learning sets. So again, if you have a look on our website, you can register to your interest in that as well. But if you're interested in becoming a facilitator, we do have our training pathway for that. So you can join our first step, which is the facilitator training. And that'll give you the confidence, structure and practical experience to ultimately facilitate high quality Action Learning sets yourself. With opportunities there available should you want to develop to our advanced masterclass. So again, it's trying to develop your skills as a facilitator so you can take it back in the organisation or you can go into organisations and support. And the last 2 is ultimately, if you're here looking to how do you use this approach to develop leaders, we work with quite a few organisations to tackle real challenges while sort of strengthening that leadership skill set. We can do that through coming in and facilitating Action Learning sets. We also do a strategic leadership inquiry sets for senior leaders. And ultimately, you can really look at how do we embed that with your leadership development programs as well to make it that little bit different. And also we look at how do we build organizational capability. So if you're looking at your organization as a people director or HRD or a CPO, as they are, lots of acronyms. Ultimately, if you're here because you'd like to build the actual capability across the organization, we can really help you look at that, whether that's delivering or whether that's working with you on a consultancy basis. So whatever you're starting from, there's a pathway to help you either as an individual grow or as someone looking at it from an organizational context. So that brings us to the end of today's session. But what I'd love to do is stop sharing and ultimately over to you in terms of any questions, any thoughts, is there anything that you would like to ask us now that you've experienced or anything? We'll give you a couple of minutes to add that. Or it looks like we've given you enough information to get you thinking around what's right or the right next step.
Feel free to just come off mute and speak up if you've got any questions you're holding. Jane says she's feeling guilty of creating cozy conversations.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you want people to participate and be open, but there's the fine balance between it being cozy, but how do you dial up the challenge a little bit more in terms of the types of questions.
Mm.
Okay.
Cool. Good.
Well, I think we can close it down then. So, look, thank you for attending today's session. Throughout today, the session, we've talked about challenges organisations face, greater complexity, the increase of pressure on leaders, the need for better collaboration, and the reality of many challenges can't be solved by simply giving more information to people. Action learning does offer that a different approach. For me, that's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't just solve today's problems or challenges, it develops the capability for people to tackle moving forward. Yes, if you're interested and curious to learn a little bit more about action learning, it's all on our website, or please get in touch, drop one of us an email. If you want to register your interest, we'll follow up with an email to give you the links for the experience action learning, but also to register your interest in the participant training and the facilitator training. So we'll send a follow-up email for that.
And also, if you just want to book a one-to-one chat with Charlotte or I to talk about your situation, we can do that as well.
Yeah. So there's one question there. Do you have to go from participation to developing leaders in that order? No, not necessarily. So if you're looking to develop leaders, you can start at that level. But it depends on what you're trying to do in that sense. But happy to speak through with you, Abraham, on that if you want to give one of us a shout. But yes, so
Priya can share the links for one-to-one chats with us in the follow-up email. Great. Bit more typing going on. And Jane, if you look under what we do on the website, and there's a section about facilitator training with the different levels that we work on, or you can contact us for a chat. Good.
I think that's. Well, hang on if anyone's got any last final questions, but if not, thank you for your time today, and we appreciate you joining and sharing your contributions through the chat.
Yeah, thanks everyone.